welcome to our show To New Perspective. You are an actress, a voice trainer, and a director. Thank you for being with us in this virtual conversation.
It's my pleasure.
Tell us first, where did your life begin and where did you born? How did you grow up?
Okay, I actually grew up in a suburb of Toronto, Etobicoke, and I spent my first 18 years there, and then I left home and I spent a couple of years traveling around as a young hippie, as we used to do in those days.
Yeah.
I traveled.
What hippie means? Can you tell us?
Oh, well, it was 1970, and so hippies were my generation's sort of alternative people who, you know, protested war movements and walked around barefoot, and that's what we mean by hippies, you know. And let's face it, smoked some dope.
Is it
Hope
like
that's okay to say.
Revolt, you know, a person who revolt against a status?
Yeah, sort of counterculture, do you know? But so I did that for a couple of years. I kind of hitchhiked around Europe, and I went to California and hitchhiked around there, and then, but then when I came back, I started acting when I was about 23. I just went to an audition and was lucky enough to get the part. So
where was the first audition? Where did you get that chance?
Well, I guess it was 1973 or 4, something like that. And it was for a theatre company here in Toronto called Theatre Passe Muraille, which is French for Theatre Without Walls. And it was one of the first small theatres in Canada that had begun to do plays by Canadians. Because before that, being a British colony, our culture was very much devoted to English theatre and English things. But in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a push against that. And people wanted to tell Canadian stories. And so Theatre Passe Muraille was one of those very early theatres, and I got lucky enough to work with them several times over my career, including a number of years later, I directed about 4 or 5 plays at Passe Muraille. So they were very much a home for me for a long time as an actor.
Interesting.
And then somewhere in there, I also started auditioning for television and film, and I was lucky. I managed to earn a living as an actor for quite a long time.
Interesting.
So,
what kind of the plays you were, performing in, and you're directing full time or in short?
Well, I did it enough that I didn't ever have to take any other work for about 20 or 25 years. So I guess you could say for an actor that's full time. It certainly didn't mean I worked every day, but I earned enough to make a living. The plays I started out as a very young actor were what we call improvisational plays. So they were plays that the actors wrote themselves. We would get together around maybe a topic, and then together we would create a play by improvising. And that was really what Passe Muraille at that time, Theatre Passe Muraille, was well known for, was the self-created play.
Like jazz, you are improvising,
Yeah, although I would say that once it hit the audience, it was pretty set.
Yeah.
But it came from us improvising until we felt we had something worthy to present. And then it was pretty much set,
That's very interesting. Sophie, you have a question for me?
Yeah, you taught me how to use my voice.
Well, first let me say you're using your voice really well right now, Sosina. Sosina was a very, very quiet speaker and had to be encouraged to share her voice so that she could share her story a bit more. And it was just beautiful working with her. I became very interested in voice because while I was acting, I also was studying whenever possible with a very famous voice teacher from England named Patsy Rodenberg. And she used to come to Toronto once a year for several years and teach. And I really, really loved it. And I loved it so much that I actually took a year off to go to England and get a degree in teaching voice. And I love it. The voice is as much the way we present ourselves as the way we look. Yeah, so actors need a lot of voice training, and anybody who uses their voice for a living can benefit from training in voice. And it's work I love to do. So I have also in my career worked a great deal training actors for their voice. I've worked at the Shaw Festival and the Stratford Festival, which are two of the two largest Canadian theatre festivals. The Stratford Festival does Shakespeare work, mostly Shakespeare. And the Shaw Festival does a lot of plays by an English writer named George Bernard Shaw, but they also do many modern plays and other plays as well. So that's another thing I do.
Were you performing in the Bernard Shaw's classics and Shakespeare? What role did you take in those plays?
You know, I only ever did Shakespeare once as an actor, which is something that makes me a bit sad. I played Lady Macbeth in the Shakespeare play Macbeth, which I enjoyed enormously.
That's very tragic.
Yeah, it's very tragic. Very unhappy play. But I teach a lot of Shakespeare now because I don't act as much as I used to. And that simply has to do with the fact that if you're a woman aging, there just aren't as many roles. For men, there still are, but for women, there are fewer and fewer. Once you pass 40, and I'm well past 40, but my life now is a lot about teaching, training actors. So I do acting classes, and I also do voice classes. And I'm constantly surprised by how much joy it brings me. I love doing it. And the shoe project for me was a bit like that because everybody who was presenting had not really had any experience being up on stage. And so that's what Leah Cherniak and I, the two women who coached, that's what we were doing, is helping people to be themselves as much as possible and also be heard. Right, Sasina?
Yeah. I know you retired, but you are still working with full energy.
Yes.
What is the secret for that?
Oh, probably at the bottom of it, needing to pay my bills. It's something I know how to do. You know, it's the world I'm familiar with, and I'm not really retired. I shot a little movie a while ago, and I'll do a little promotion for it now because it's called Spinster, and it's out now on Vimeo. If you know what Vimeo is, you can watch it. So I still do some acting.
When do you release it on Vimeo?
It's released now.
Really? It's okay, we can see it.
Yeah.
What's the title?
Spinster.
Spinster. Okay.
Do you know that word in English?
What does it exactly mean?
In English, it means an unmarried woman. And it's an interesting word because if you're an unmarried man, you're called a bachelor, which is a kind of, you know, it's sometimes being called a bachelor is sort of sexy, but to be called a spinster is not at all. So it's one of those words where if it's applied to the man, it's kind of great. And when it's applied to the woman, it's sort of, oh, poor thing, a spinster.
It's a taboo in the
it has a negative connotation. So the women who wrote and directed this movie wanted to sort of look at that, you know, and say, couldn't you be a spinster and be a happy, fulfilled human being? So that's what, and it's a light comedy. It's quite fun.
It's really interesting. Still, you are a voice for the voiceless. You know, let's talk about this thing. You know, being an actress is not it's not fun in Hollywood or in the Western theater or film industry.
Well,
it's a challenge. I know. So
it's a challenge. I would say that often when you're doing it, it is fun. And very fulfilling, but yes, it's a challenging life. Right now, all the actors I know are unemployed because of COVID. Of course, all the theaters had to close right down. So, if it isn't one thing, it's another. You know, it's not an easy life, but it's a very, very fulfilling life.
I know. Who is your a role model before you became an actress?
Well, there's a great Canadian classical actress named Martha Henry. She's in her 80s now, still acting, still directing. She directs Shakespeare and lots of other things. And she's always been a role model to probably every actress or even actor in the country. She's immensely talented, deeply generous with her time, wonderfully disciplined. Yeah, so Martha Henry was a big role model. There's another woman I would say has been a role model for me. Her name is Jackie Maxwell, and she was the artistic director at the Shaw Festival for about 10 years. And I was very grateful to her for bringing me there to direct, because that was a big step up for me. I directed at smaller theaters, but the Shaw Festival's big. And Jackie is not only enormously talented and fun, she's a true defender of women. So she brought a lot of women in to direct at a place where women had very rarely directed. So she was a role model too. Is a role model.
That's great. You know, I mean, directing is a tough job. Mostly it's taken by the male. So being a female director is, you know, something different, especially in the Southern Hemisphere. It's not easy being a director.
Yeah. Well, you're a director too, aren't you?
Yeah. Yes, I'm directing. I'm directing. Yes. And what's your philosophy in the plays that you direct, and what kind of style you're following? You know, in the plays or in the movies.
I don't know that I could say I'm following a particular style. I believe in the kind of work I do, there's a writer, there's a script that you start with. And I believe that it's the director's job and the actor's job to let that be the source of everything. Let that be where all your decisions come from, is respecting the writing and trying to bring the writer's truth to the audience. So that will often define the style that you need to use. The writing itself will tell you. I once heard a great actor, an old English actor, he was asked what style is, and he said, style is knowing the play you're in. And I think that's very true. The play itself will define the style. The writing will define the style.
Yeah, sometimes, you know, the director and the writer, especially when you are playing a teleplay, a novel, you know, into a movie, sometimes there is a clash between the director and the writer. So have you ever experienced such a clash with a writer?
I wouldn't say that I have. Some of the writers I've directed are dead, so they can't really rise up and say, no, not like that. But I've worked with living writers too. One thing I believe that comes from working, and you'll understand this, comes from working in theater and film, is that at essence, you're a collaborative artist. You're not a painter alone with your paints or a writer alone with the empty page. You work always by collaborating with other people. And I think that artists in that field just become collaborators. So you learn how to shift and move with what the other artists are bringing to the table.
What is your take on the Me Too movement?
I'm very happy about the Me Too movement and would very much like to be an ally with the Me Too movement. I've been taking a course actually on inclusivity, which is meant to make you more aware of your own unconscious biases, what language you might be using that is hurtful. And the goal of the course, once you've figured all that out, is to teach you how to be an ally. And I really like the term. I think if someone was to say, are you a racist? Right away you feel kind of choked with fear, do you know? But if someone says, are you an ally? You might say, well, I don't know that I am, but I'd like to be. I'd like to learn how to be. So I would say my goal now is to learn effective ways to be an ally towards the Black Lives Matter and any group that is seeking equality. I'd like to become an ally.
እየተከታተላችሁ ያላችሁት የአዲስ ቅኝትን የሚዲያ አገልግሎት ነው። እኛ ነፃ የሐሳብ ልውውጥ እንዲኖር ከመገፋፋት መሳሳብ ከመራራቅ መቀራረብ እንዲፈጠር ጠንክረን እንሰራለን። እናንተ ላይክ፣ ሼር እና ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ የማህበረሰብ ሚዲያ አጋርነታችሁን አረጋግጡ። አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት።
If you speak about the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, tell us your experience, when it comes to racism and, discrimination of any kind.
Well, I think my main experience is working within systemic racist institutions. We can walk about going, oh, I'm not a racist. I don't say bad things about anybody else based on color or anything like that. But then when you ask to step back and say, well, what about the institutions you work for, which would be the theater? How many people of color are represented? How many plays are represented? Then you have to go, oh, I guess there's a larger issue that we need to look at, which is that as individuals we can say we're not racist, but we may actually be representing systemic racism. And that's where I think being an ally comes in, where you go, all right, well, let's look deeply at that and see what we can do about that. I teach acting at the University of Toronto. We're really we've been asked some very hard questions by some of our students about what we teach and how much we really are helping. And those questions, I have found them very, very challenging. They've made me have to look quite deeply at whether I'm part of the solution or not.
Are you ready for the solution?
I want to be. Yeah.
I mean, what's the role of art in, if you mention about that, do you think an artist can change this kind of thinking?
Yeah, I do. I think art always has been a part of changing a culture's thinking and sometimes played a leading role in changing a culture's thinking. Not always. That's not always what art is. I mean, sometimes in theater we just want to entertain. That's fair too. But yes, I think art has always shown some degree of leadership in these areas.
That's very interesting. What's your major performances? Can you recite us, the lines that you love in the place you perform?
The lines, like lines from a...
Lines from...
Well, let's see if I can call up any Lady Macbeth. I feel put on the spot, and that's when I forget. She accuses her husband of being full of the of too much human kindness and not being ambitious enough. I can't make those lines come back because I feel sort of suddenly, whoa, and my mind goes blank. I'll remember them later.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll tell us the lines, not performing, but...
Yeah, well, let's see. No, you see, because I'm feeling put on the spot, they've all gone out of my head.
Yeah.
But what I meant when I said they'll come back later,
yes.
Once we turn the Zoom meeting off, they'll all come rushing back.
I know.
Kate, do you have any reason to study voice?
Well, really, it was that I loved working with the woman I studied voice with. I found it so powerful. When you're studying voice, if you're an actor studying voice, you are actually studying acting. Because to be an authentic actor, you have to be physically very open. That means you have to be able to breathe very deeply, and because your emotions, you tap into your emotions via your breath.
Yeah.
And if your breath is locked, do you know when we panic, when we're frightened, our breath gets locked up here?
Yeah.
So we can't draw in a deep breath. And if you can't draw in a deep breath, you're never really going to be able to tap into your emotional life. So you'll never be able to bring that to the emotional life of the character that you're playing. So to study voice as an actor is to study acting.
Especially for an actor who performs on stage, voice is a great tool. But for
it is. It's also surprisingly important for film too, because sometimes in film, if you're in a very, very extreme close-up and you can't use your voice too much, like you can't be too loud because it would be inappropriate for that little close-up. Sometimes when you have to make your voice very, very small, it can be difficult to get a lot of color and emotion into it. So voice work helps an actor on film as well. In fact, the one time I ever lost my voice, totally lost my voice, was shooting, because they got to my close-up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd been there since 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so 13 hours. And it was outside, and it was very cold and very wet. And I had to, in the scene, I had to shout through the whole scene. Just shout and shout and shout. And through all the rehearsals, and then through the big wide shot, and then through the close-ups. And by the time they got to my close-up, I had no voice left. That was before I studied voice. Okay. So it can really matter in film too.
Yes. And I mean, in the old days, in the silent age, you can perform
without it,
mimes without it.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the role of mime in this age. Are you still directing mime plays? Are we using them?
Not. I mean, I would think that there are in a lot of theater, they're very movement based. So I wouldn't know that they would refer to it as mime, because mime is often convincing people that I'm drinking or there's a plate of glass here, whereas movement is much more It can be anything. It can be leaping across the stage or doing very strange things with your body. And certainly lots of theater is very movement-based. Yeah.
Working with an inclusive artistic landscape, and we are considering people who can't hear, who can't hear. So mime, I think, has a big role in that.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, there are, in terms of inclusivity, so much of it now is how do we get people with disabilities, people who can't hear, people who can't see, people who can't speak, people who need access for wheelchairs, that sort of thing, into the theater. In fact, a friend of mine, a wonderful woman named Alex Ballmer, who is blind, and she's a writer and, if you can believe it, a theater director and an actor. Wow. And she's about to start a theater whose mandate will be disability inclusive theater. So working with blind actors, deaf actors, yeah. In fact, I have taught voice to a woman who was deaf at a theater school. One of the students was deaf, and it was fascinating because I talked to her, for she had interpreters, and I said to her that when I teach voice, I often say that every voice exercise at its basis is a breath exercise. So that's how I would work with her. And we had a wonderful time. And I was very proud of that group of students who worked with her, because about 2/3 of the class was learning sign language. I know, good, eh?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. You remember who was Helen Keller's teacher? So
yeah, Helen Keller's teacher. That was the name. Annie Sullivan. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, she not only taught Helen Keller, she taught the whole world, really, what can be done. Yeah.
So we are still hoping, there is still hope for even a person who has no connection to the outside world. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think in Canada we're not perfect, but I do think we make an attempt to move forward. We've made a lot of mistakes, but I like to think that there is a strong movement towards inclusivity.
I hope so. Yes, that's true. That's true. We are part of that. We are working together. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay. Can you tell us about the shoe project and its impact?
Well, I have only been involved in the shoe project for the last 2 years. So in a way, it's been running for 8 years, and I'm a bit of a newcomer to it. I would say its impact on my own life is I've made some amazing new friends, like you. I was really thrilled at how the shows were sold out. It's very clear that people really want to hear these stories. And so I think there are 2 impacts: that on the performer, yourself, the chance to share that story, and then the audiences all seem so enthusiastic and willing to put some money down and show up and share in the event. So I think those are pretty great things, that stories are being shared. And nothing's as wonderful as knowing another person's story, really, is it? Every story is individual, and every story shares our humanity with another human being, I think. So as I said, I think of myself as a bit of a newcomer, but I'm so happy that Catherine Govier brought me in to the project, because I've been able to see the impact it's had on audiences and celebrate it.
That's interesting. Have you ever think about, making some of the stories into a play? Maybe, I don't know.
It's a good idea. It's a very good idea. Why don't you make Sosina's story? Or Sosina, you should write your story.
So what do you think the future of stage performance and any performing arts in the near future?
It's very hard to say, isn't it? I mean, I don't know any more than anyone else knows. I don't know. It's so, theaters here are they're not very well funded, and they're very precarious. So if they could only play to, say, 1/3 of an audience, I don't know if they could survive. The way, they're saying, like, you might be able to go to a movie theater and they'd only let in a certain number of people. Maybe they'll start trying that with theaters. I don't know. Nobody really knows what the future is right now, do we? What about sending your son to school? I know we're sort of off topic. I hope that's okay.
That's an issue. We have to send it, unless, if there is a safe place, if the number of students in the class is, limited.
Yeah.
Because the kids wants to go to school.
They do. And they need their friends. They need everything that they get from their own peer group, too.
Yes. But it's very risky. I don't know.
I know.
What to do. We didn't decide yet. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much for this great time, Kate. So if you have anything to add at the end of our conversation, the floor is yours.
Just that it's been a wonderful experience getting to know you both. And for that, I'm immensely grateful to the Shoe Project. I got to spend so much time with Sosina, and I think we laughed a lot and had a wonderful time.
Yeah, me too.
Love you. Thank you very much.
Love you too. Thank you. It's just wonderful to see you both.
Yeah, thank you so much.
እየተከታተላችሁ ያላችሁት የአዲስ ቅኝትን የሚዲያ አገልግሎት ነው። እኛ ነፃ የሐሳብ ልውውጥ እንዲኖር ከመገፋፋት መሳሳብ ከመራራቅ መቀራረብ እንዲፈጠር ጠንክረን እንሰራለን። እናንተ ላይክ፣ ሼር እና ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ የማህበረሰብ ሚዲያ አጋርነታችሁን አረጋግጡ። አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት